Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to introduce the Maya interface here. So just give you a general lay of the land and how to just kind of basically navigate the software here. So when you open it up, it should look something like this. And if you look over here in the top right corner, it says Workspace Maya Classic. So anyone who's familiar with Photoshop or any Adobe programs, and most Adobe programs, if you look in this top corner, you can kind of change your workspace up here. And that's the same for Maya here. So we have the classic view. And if you're doing modeling, for instance, you can kind of switch it to this view right here. If you're doing, and we'll go over this down the line with this class, but if you're doing, a different task like UV editing, the window will look different here. So for this, you'll probably want just to be in the Maya Classic view right here, which should hopefully be at the top there. So looking at this workspace right here, we have these different areas, and I'll start with just the main perspective view right here. And so in the previous tutorial, I go over how to change your camera view, right? You hold Option and use your 3-button mouse. So if you're not sure how to do that, just check the last tutorial that goes over it very quickly there for you. And so that's kind of how you move around your scene. And if you want to, let's say we want to create just a basic cube in here, make sure that you're under the Poly Modeling tab, and it should look like this tab with these orange icons right here. You can see there's these different tabs, and we'll go over these down the road here that kind of cover different tasks. And these are just kind of shortcuts here. And so if you want to create a cube, this button right here creates a cube. Or you can go up to Create, and then Polygon Primitives, and then you have some options here of some primitive objects that you can create into the scene. So I'll just do a cube right here. So when you import a cube, it should look something like this. And one thing I want to say here is, so I have it selected, and this button right here is your selection tool, and then the 2 buttons underneath it are just different ways that you can create selections here. So if I want to select my cube, the main selection tool, you just drag a square over the objects you want to select, and then it'll select it right there. So we're kind of looking at these buttons over here. If you want to select it using like a lasso tool, this button right here it does the same thing. It selects your objects, but it just does it in a different manner where you can kind of draw out a selection tool here and close it off. And you can select objects that way. And then finally, there's the 3rd selection tool, which I don't really happen to use very much, but it's the paint selection tool. So we'll click on that, and then kind of, oh yeah, that's better for vertices and things like that. So we'll go over that down the road. So not super helpful for objects. So this these 3 buttons right here, most of the time you'll be using probably this one right here, the top one, but you might like the lasso tool more. So beneath that, we have the Move, Rotate, and Scale object buttons right here. And so let's say I have this object selected right here. Let me just do this real quick. So let's say you have this object selected right here, and you want to move it. You'll press this button right here. The shortcut for this button is W. And all you need to do is just grab either this arrow to pull it vertically. You can do the blue arrow to move it left or right. And I'm pressing Edit Undo by pressing Command Z right now to undo my moves. And then you can do the red arrow right here to move it that way in space. And that's the Move tool right there, which is W. The shortcut for Select right here is Q. And so Q and W are right next to each other on your keyboard at the top. And let's say we want to rotate this object right here. You press this button right here, and that rotates the object. So if I want to rotate it left or right, I can just grab the red handle, front to back, the blue handle, and then around its axis there vertically is the green handle right there. Kind of backtracking one moment, going back to the Move tool, I highly recommend that when you're moving objects here is to grab these arrows. And the temptation for some people is to selecting the side of this box and move it this way, which can sometimes be quicker. But a lot of the times when you use this move tool, it can, at least when you're in the main perspective view, it can kind of cause the object to kind of move into unexpected places right here. So you'll kind of move your object thinking it's like still along the ground right here or something like that, and then you'll move, and then you'll notice that, oh, whoops, I just lifted my object, 3 feet off the ground. So try to use these handles right here. So we have the move tool, the rotate tool, and then finally we have the scale tool. And the scale tool, if you want to scale an object uniformly, and it's this button right here, and again the shortcut for it is R, the shortcut for rotate is E. So Q, W, E, R, they're all right next to each other on the keyboard, and they're the shortcuts for all these buttons right here. So Q is select, W is move, E is rotate, and R is scale. And I use those shortcuts all the time. I basically never press these buttons over here. And so the scale tool, which is R, you would think rotate would be R, but scale is R. If you want to scale it uniformly, you can select in this box right here, the middle box, and you scale it up, and it'll scale uniformly right there. If you want to scale it to be tall, you can just grab the top handle, move it that way. If you want it to be wide, that way. And if you want it to be thick, you can move it that way. So you can scale your objects this way as well, using these controls over here. So, continue to just kind of go over the basics of the interface just to help everyone kind of get started with the program and get familiar with it here. Is if you right click on your keyboard, this menu will come up, or sorry, on your right click on your mouse, this menu will come up right here. And so what we've been doing is we've been working in object mode. And object mode will highlight your object green, and it just makes it when you do like your move tool or your scale tool, you're moving the whole object at the same time right here. If you right click, there's a few different other modes here. And so the other modes I want to go over here quickly today are the edge mode, the vertex mode, and the face mode. So vertices, let's start with vertices. So if you right click and go over to vertex right there, oops, I right click and go over to vertex right there, it'll look like this. And what this means is when I do my selection tool, which I can either press this button or press Q, I can drag and select, and I can just only select one vertex at a time right here. And so I can just hold shift and then drag and select another one right there. And so right now I have these two vertices selected right here. And now when I press the move tool, or W, instead of moving the whole object, I'm just moving those 2 points of the cube right there. So that's vertice mode, so that's 1 point at a time. Next is edge mode, where you can select one edge at a time. So you right click, and then you go to edge mode. And then you can see as I hover my cursor over different edges, they highlight red. So let's say I want to move that edge right there. I can press the move tool, or W, and just simply move that edge right there. And then finally, there's face mode, where you can select any of these faces. So I'll right click, go down to face right there, and you can see I can select that whole face right there, and then press the move tool, or W, and then I can extend it out that way. And being able to just kind of navigate these controls that I'm showing are kind of just super important, just to get practice moving your perspective view around and kind of getting used to that. Get used to these controls right here, and get used to right clicking and going between object mode, vertex mode, edge mode, and face mode right there. And if you can do that, you're gonna have a nice start here with this program. So one other thing I want to show about navigating the view, and I go over this in the last tutorial, is if you're moving around and you kind of lose track of your object right there, if you press F, it'll zoom back in on your object right there. So just kind of keep that in mind here. So F as in focus. So we went over holding right click. That's one really helpful button that you need to get used to for navigation here. Next, I want to talk about the space bar. And the space bar is going to start kind of going over some of these buttons down here a little bit. So this view is the view that we're currently in, which is we can only see the perspective view. In Maya, there's something called the orthographic view, which is what you start to get when you press this button right here. So if you press that button right there, you can see our perspective views split into 4 views. So we still have our perspective view right here. But then additionally, we have a view of the cube from the top. We have a view of our cube from the front, and a view of our cube from the side. And so this can be really helpful while you're modeling projects or setting up your scenes to be able to see things in all 4 views at once right here. So you can either get there by pressing this button right here, and then returning to the perspective view by pressing this button right here, or you can just tap spacebar. So don't hold it, but tap spacebar, and it'll go back and forth. Oops. It'll go back and forth between those views. So perspective view, tap spacebar, we're in the 4 view, then back to perspective view again. So looking at these orthographic views, you can move your camera the same way you can in the perspective view. But if you're looking at your top view, for instance, and I'll just focus in on my top view by holding my cursor over the top view and then tapping spacebar. So now we can only see the cube from the top. And I can move my camera around by holding Option and then doing the middle mouse click, and I can pan around here. And then additionally, I can hold Option and then right click and drag from left to right to zoom in, or right click and drag from right to left to zoom back out again. But I can't rotate around my object anymore because this view is locked off. We can only see things from straight above our object here, and that's the same for if we do the front view. So I'll tap spacebar to go to my front view, where I can pan and zoom, but I can't rotate around my object here. So again, I'm just tapping spacebar and hovering my cursor over which view I want to look at. So this is the side view, tap spacebar. And if I want to return to my perspective view, I can just hold my cursor over perspective, tap it again, and we're back in here. So that's this button right here and this button. So if you don't want to do the spacebar, you can just press those buttons right there. And then the final one I want to go over here, at least in this lesson, is this button right here. And this just splits it into 2 views instead of 4. It's the exact same as this button right here, but this button just switches it into 2 views instead of 4. And a lot of the times when I'm modeling, I'll actually work this way here. So continue to just move through the basic interface here. We've kind of gone over just some of the basics of this poly modeling tab. You know, if you want to create some primitive objects, you can just click on one of these buttons here, or go up to the create menu and then go under poly primitives and select from this menu right here. And there's a few more options in here. We've gone over the basics of the perspective view and gone over most of these buttons right here, most of the important buttons over here, and then gone over the shortcuts of them. And next I want to just talk about this view right here, which is called the outliner. And if you don't see the outliner right here, it should hopefully show up for you right here. But if you don't see it, go to Windows. Let's see here. Sorry about that. Oh, right. Sorry. Windows and then outliner right here. And it'll appear for you right there. Or it'll appear for you somewhere on your screen. And what the outliner is you can see I've created a cube in my scene, and there's nothing else really in my scene. I have the perspective view, the top, front, and side view, which come default in Maya, right? So that's what I was just showing with these orthographic views. And it's got kind of these 2 things right here. You just don't even worry about it. That's just always in your Maya scene. It's the default light set and default object set, and that just kind of helps you see things in Maya here. But I've created one polycube, and that's the object that shows here. So as you're working in Maya, as you start creating different new objects and things like that, they'll all show up here in your outliner. And this is a helpful way just to stay organized and keep track of what you have going on in your scene here. And it's helpful to name these things as you're working. So if you want to rename your objects, and it can be helpful in order to stay organized, you can just click and then double click where it says polycube right there, and I can just call this like cube 1, something like that. and it's just a helpful way to stay organized in here. A helpful tip here is when you're working in Maya, don't save things with special characters. So special characters are things like the exclamation mark, the money sign, the and, a plus sign. You don't want any of that in your names. It can kind of cause issues in the program. So just try to keep it to just numbers and letters here. And if you need a space, for instance, instead of writing cube cube number 1 like this, what I would do, and I know I misspelled that, is you do underscores, which is towards the top under your number keys, is the button under the normal dash. So if you need to do a space, try to do underscores like that, and things will just run a little bit more smoothly in Maya right there. But the outliner is where you keep track of the objects in your scene. And then over on the right, this will kind of change depending on the way that you're working in Maya. But we have the modeling toolkit right here, and these are just some helpful shortcuts that'll help with modeling, which we'll show in future lessons. You can also see there's this tab right here. It's called the attribute editor. And this has, so the tab is right here for me, and you can see that I have these different tabs up here, and I'm looking at the third tab. It's called Polycube1, which is the name of this object right here. And I can do things like change the width, the height. I can change the attributes in the attribute editor over here. So if you look on your right, the attribute editor should pretty much always be on the side, and there'll always be some different tabs that you need to kind of go between. But we have the main tabs that you need to worry about is the attribute editor, where we can I'll go over this in much more detail later on, but you can adjust the main attributes of an object here. We have the modeling toolkit, which has just some helpful shortcuts that we'll use when modeling things. And then we have the channel box layer editor, which shows some more attributes of our object right here, as well as display layers and some other things like that. So essentially on the right side of your screen, just kind of keep an eye out for different tabs here, and we'll dive into these more in the future weeks here. But the main thing to keep track of is the attribute editor right here, the modeling toolkit, and then maybe to a slightly lesser degree the channel box and layer editor right there.